Hey, thanks for being here. Settle in and let's unwind with a slow story from Greek mythology. In the ancient Greek world, myth was not a separate category of thought. It was not entertainment set apart from daily life, nor a symbolic puzzle meant to be decoded later by philosophers or psychologists. Myth was reality as it was understood, felt, feared, and lived. To speak of Persephone and the seasons is to step into a worldview where the land itself was alive, where the earth responded to emotion, where divine presence was not abstract but immediate and deeply personal. Ancient Greeks did not wake up thinking they lived in a mythological age. They woke up believing the world functioned the way it did because of divine forces whose actions shaped every harvest, every storm, every birth, and every death. Grain did not grow simply because seeds were planted correctly. Grain grew because Demeter allowed it. Winter did not arrive because of astronomical cycles alone. Winter came because something had gone wrong in the divine order. This way of understanding the world developed over centuries, shaped by geography, agriculture, migration, and survival. Greece was a land of sharp contrasts. Mountains fractured the landscape, isolating communities. Soil quality varied dramatically. Rainfall was unpredictable. A single failed harvest could mean starvation. In this environment, people searched for explanations that went beyond chance. They needed reasons that made emotional sense, not just practical ones. Myth gave those reasons shape. Rather than asking why crops failed in a technical sense, myths asked who was grieving, who was angry, who had been wronged. Nature reflected relationships. When harmony existed among the gods, the world prospered. When it broke, humans suffered. This was not metaphor to the ancient mind. It was cause and effect. The story of Persephone sits at the heart of this worldview because it explains something fundamental and terrifying: the seasonal death of the land. Fields that were green and full became brown and lifeless. Fruit trees dropped their leaves. The earth itself seemed to withdraw. Without modern science, this disappearance of life demanded explanation, and the explanation needed to match the emotional weight of the loss. Before Persephone, there was Kore. Names mattered deeply in Greek myth, and Kore simply meant the maiden. She was not yet defined by absence or return. She belonged fully to the world above, to open air, wildflowers, and growth that moved upward toward the sun. The transformation from Kore to Persephone marks one of the most significant identity shifts in all of Greek mythology, and it mirrors the way the Greeks understood life itself as a cycle of becoming, loss, and return. To understand why this story mattered so much, it helps to understand how myths functioned socially. Greek myths were not fixed texts. They were fluid narratives passed orally, reshaped by region, ritual, and need. A farmer in Attica might emphasize Demeter's suffering differently than a poet in Sicily. A mystery cult would guard certain details carefully, while public festivals celebrated others openly. Despite these variations, the core emotional truths remained consistent. Persephone's descent meant absence. Demeter's grief meant famine. Persephone's return meant renewal. Agriculture was not just an occupation, it was survival itself. Most Greeks lived close to the land, and their religious calendar followed the farming year. Sowing, harvesting, resting the fields. These were sacred acts. Festivals aligned with planting cycles. Offerings were made not out of abstract piety, but fear and gratitude. Demeter was one of the most widely worshipped deities in the Greek world because she governed the thin line between abundance and starvation. Her myths were not distant stories. They were explanations for why bread existed at all. This context is essential because Persephone's story is inseparable from Demeter's role as an agricultural goddess. The seasons were not neutral divisions of time. They were emotional states of the earth itself, responding to divine experience. The Greeks also lived in a world where death was constant and visible. Infant mortality was high. Disease spread quickly. Warfare was frequent. Burial rites mattered deeply because they marked the boundary between the living and the dead. The underworld was not a place of moral judgment in the modern sense. It was a destination everyone reached. This made Persephone's dual role uniquely powerful. She did not simply disappear into death, she moved between worlds. She belonged to both the living and the dead. That made her a bridge, and bridges were sacred. Unlike later traditions that sharply separated life and death, the Greek worldview allowed for continuity. The dead were gone, but they were not erased. They existed beneath the earth, just as seeds did before sprouting. This parallel was not accidental. Seeds buried in the soil disappeared before returning as plants. Persephone followed the same pattern. Myth made this pattern intelligible. The ancient Greeks were keen observers of nature. They knew plants died and returned. They noticed that some seeds required burial to grow. They understood that winter prepared the land for spring. But observation alone did not satisfy the emotional reality of loss. Myth gave winter a face, a reason, and a promise. The promise mattered. Persephone does not simply vanish. She returns. Her story reassures that absence is not final, that death is not permanent silence, and that loss contains the possibility of renewal. In an agricultural society, this belief was not comforting. It was necessary. Greek myths were also deeply concerned with boundaries, between childhood and adulthood, between life and death, between mortal and divine. Persephone's story sits at the intersection of all three. Her movement marks a transition that cannot be undone. After her descent, she is no longer only Kore. She becomes queen of the underworld. This transformation reflects how the Greeks understood maturity. Growth was not linear or gentle. It involved rupture, separation, irreversible change. Persephone's story acknowledges that becoming something new often requires leaving something behind. The myth also reflects ancient ideas about marriage. For Greek women, marriage often meant leaving the household of their mother and entering the authority of another. This transition was framed as both necessary and painful. Persephone's descent echoes that experience on a cosmic scale. Yet the myth does not erase Demeter's voice. Her grief reshapes the world itself. The earth refuses to cooperate while she mourns. Crops fail, hunger spreads, the gods are forced to respond. This is not a story where divine authority is unquestioned. Zeus may rule the heavens, but Demeter controls the earth. The myth acknowledges power as relational rather than absolute. No god exists in isolation. This tension reflects real human experience. Authority structures existed, but they were fragile. Kings depended on farmers. Cities depended on grain shipments. A single drought could destabilize entire regions. Persephone's story encodes that fragility into myth. It is also important to understand that myths were not purely explanatory. They were participatory. People reenacted them through ritual. The Eleusinian Mysteries, centered on Demeter and Persephone, promised initiates a deeper understanding of life, death, and continuity. What exactly happened in these rituals remains largely unknown, but their importance is undeniable. Participation crossed class lines. Even slaves could be initiated. This suggests the myth addressed universal fears: fear of hunger, fear of loss, fear of death, and the hope that these states were not final. The language of myth allowed these fears to be spoken without being reduced. Rather than offering certainty, the story offered rhythm. Loss would come. Return would follow. The cycle would continue. In this way, Persephone and the Seasons are not merely an origin story. They are a worldview expressed through narrative. They explain why the land dies and lives again, but they also explain why humans endure grief and continue forward. The Greeks did not separate cosmic order from emotional truth. They believed the universe responded to love, betrayal, sorrow, and compromise. Persephone's story holds all of these elements in balance. As we move deeper into the myth, into Demeter's sorrow and Persephone's transformation, It is worth remembering that these stories were never meant to be distant. They were told beside hearth fires, whispered during rituals, and invoked when the fields lay empty. This is where the story begins. Not with an abduction, not with winter, but with a world that needed to believe the earth would forgive itself and bloom again. Demeter was not a distant or abstract goddess. To the ancient Greek mind, she was as close as the bread on the table and as terrifying as an empty field. Her presence was felt every time grain sprouted from the soil, and every time it failed to do so. Unlike gods associated with thunder, war, or the open sky, Demeter's power unfolded quietly, season by season, rooted in the ground beneath human feet. She was one of the oldest Olympian deities, her worship stretching back into the Mycenaean period and likely earlier. Archaeological evidence suggests that Demeter, or a proto-agricultural goddess closely resembling her, was revered long before the Olympian order was fully formed. This matters because it places her authority not as something granted by Zeus, but as something elemental, tied to the earliest survival needs of settled communities. Demeter's domain was grain, but grain in the ancient world was not merely food, it was stability. It was civilization itself. The transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture reshaped human society, allowing for permanent settlements, population growth, and cultural development. Demeter embodied that transformation. Where she was honored, cities could exist. Her name is often interpreted as meaning Earth Mother, though scholars debate the precise linguistic roots. What is clear is that Demeter was inseparable from the cultivated earth. She was not a wild fertility goddess of untamed forests, but a guardian of fields that required care, patience, and cooperation. Her power rewarded labor, but it could also withdraw without warning. This duality defined her character. Demeter was capable of generosity beyond measure. Under her blessing, the earth produced abundance. Fields ripened with wheat and barley. Olive groves flourished. Bread was baked, shared, stored, and relied upon. Entire communities lived because Demeter allowed it. But she was also capable of devastating refusal. When Demeter turned away from the earth, crops failed. Soil hardened. Seeds rotted underground. Famine followed. This was not framed as cruelty. It was framed as consequence. Demeter's emotional state directly affected the land, because she and the land were functionally the same. This belief gave human emotion cosmic significance. Grief was not private, it was ecological. Demeter's mythology reflects this truth repeatedly. Unlike many Olympian gods who act impulsively or playfully, Demeter's actions are deeply tied to relational bonds, especially motherhood. Her most defining relationship is with her daughter Persephone, but even before that, Demeter is portrayed as a figure of nurture, teaching humanity the secrets of agriculture. In several traditions, Demeter is credited with instructing mortals in the cultivation of grain. She teaches how to plow, sow, harvest, and store crops. This knowledge is sacred. It is not discovered independently. It is given. The idea that agriculture was a divine gift reinforced gratitude and obligation. Humans did not own the land outright. They borrowed its productivity through proper reverence. Demeter's importance can be measured by how widespread and consistent her worship was. Nearly every Greek polis honored her in some form. Her festivals were agricultural markers as much as religious events. The Thesmophoria, celebrated primarily by women, focused on fertility, both of crops and families. These rituals were not theatrical reenactments. They were practical invocations, meant to ensure survival. Women played a central role in Demeter's cults, reflecting her association with fertility, childbirth, and domestic continuity. While Greek society limited women's public power, Demeter's worship offered a space where female experience mattered. Grief, motherhood, and endurance were elevated to divine importance. This context deepens the emotional weight of Demeter's later actions. When Persephone is taken, Demeter's response is not exaggerated melodrama. It is the reaction of a goddess whose entire identity is bound to nurturing life. Demeter is not portrayed as passive or resigned. She searches, she wanders the earth, she refuses consolation. Her grief is active, restless, and disruptive. Before Persephone's descent, Demeter exists in relative harmony within the Olympian order. She is respected, if not feared. Her power is steady rather than explosive. She does not dominate myths through violence or deception. Instead, she governs through necessity. No god can replace her function. This becomes painfully clear when she withdraws her blessing from the land. Zeus may command the sky, Poseidon may rule the sea, Hades may govern the dead, but none of them can make wheat grow. Demeter's withdrawal exposes a vulnerability at the heart of divine hierarchy. Power is distributed, authority is negotiated. The myth does not present Zeus as an absolute ruler capable of forcing compliance without consequence. This reflects how ancient Greeks understood power in their own world. Kings relied on harvests. Armies depended on supply lines. No authority could override hunger. Demeter's maternal identity is not sentimentalized. It is fierce, protective, uncompromising. She does not accept Persephone's loss as inevitable or acceptable. She challenges the cosmic order itself by allowing famine to spread. This action is radical. Demeter does not attack Olympus directly. She does something more devastating. She stops feeding the world. Her grief becomes leverage. It is important to note that Demeter's sorrow is not portrayed as weakness. In Greek myth, emotion is often a source of power. Rage drives Achilles. Jealousy fuels Hera. Desire propels Aphrodite. Demeter's grief reshapes reality. The land mirrors her inner state. This connection between emotion and environment reinforces the myth's agricultural logic. If crops depend on divine favor, then divine emotion must matter. Demeter's story also acknowledges the cost of love. To care deeply is to risk devastation. Demeter loves Persephone without reservation, and that love makes her vulnerable. Yet the myth does not suggest she should love less. Instead, it presents love as a force capable of challenging gods and reshaping time. Her eventual compromise is not surrender, it is negotiation. Demeter does not simply accept Persephone's partial absence. She secures terms. She ensures that her daughter's time below is limited, structured, and cyclical. This outcome preserves balance without erasing grief. Demeter's cult significance extends beyond agriculture into concepts of afterlife and continuity. Through the Eleusinian Mysteries, she becomes associated with promises of renewal beyond death. While the details of these rites remain intentionally obscured by history, ancient sources emphasize their transformative impact on initiates. Participants were not promised immortality. They were promised understanding. Understanding that life and death were phases, not endpoints. Understanding that loss was woven into growth. Understanding that darkness did not negate meaning. Demeter stands at the center of this promise. She is both the grieving mother and the guarantor of return. Her suffering is real, but it is not meaningless. This makes her one of the most human gods in the Greek pantheon. Not because she is weak, but because she embodies endurance. Demeter does not forget her loss. Each year, when Persephone descends, the earth remembers with her. Fields lie fallow. Growth slows. The world rests, mourns, and waits. And when Persephone returns, Demeter allows the land to breathe again. This rhythm defines the agricultural year and the emotional landscape of ancient life. It teaches patience. It teaches acceptance without erasure. Demeter's power lies not in domination but in persistence. She sustains life not through spectacle, but through continuity. Her myth insists that survival is sacred, that grief has consequences, and that renewal is earned through endurance. As we move forward into Persephone's own identity and transformation, it becomes clear that Demeter's role is not background or secondary. She is the axis upon which the seasons turn. Without Demeter, Persephone's story would be a tragedy without resolution. With her, it becomes a cycle, painful, necessary, and enduring. Before she was Persephone, queen of the underworld, she was Kore. The name Kore meant simply the maiden, but in the ancient Greek world, simplicity carried weight. Kore was not an individual defined by personal history or political power. She was a state of being, youth, unclaimed life, growth that had not yet been interrupted. Kore existed entirely within the upper world. She belonged to light, to movement, to fields in bloom, and hillsides washed in green. She was not yet divided between realms. She did not yet carry death within her identity. Her presence aligned perfectly with spring, not just as a season, but as a condition of the world. In Greek thought, maidenhood was not merely an age category, it was a liminal phase, a time of openness and potential, but also vulnerability. A maiden existed between childhood and adulthood, between protection and exposure. This in-between state carried both beauty and danger. Kore embodied that tension. She is most often depicted in early myth, wandering meadows, gathering flowers, moving freely through the landscape without fear. These scenes are not incidental. They establish her complete belonging to the world of growth and renewal. Flowers, in particular, mattered deeply in Greek symbolism. They represented transient beauty, fertility, and the fleeting nature of youth. Spring flowers bloom brightly and disappear quickly. Kore moves among them as one of them. Unlike many Olympian figures, Kore does not speak much in the early mythic material. Her silence is not emptiness, it reflects her status. She has not yet been required to assert herself. The world has not yet demanded anything from her. This absence of agency is not accidental. It reflects the social realities of ancient Greece, where young women rarely controlled the circumstances of their transition into adulthood. Marriage was arranged. Movement between households was expected. The emotional cost was rarely centered. Kore's early identity mirrors this reality. Yet Kore is not insignificant. She is deeply valued. Demeter's devotion makes that clear. Kore is the future of the agricultural cycle. She represents continuity. As long as Kore remains above ground, Demeter's work is complete. In some traditions, Kore is associated with the earliest shoots of grain pushing through soil. This imagery blurs the boundary between human and plant life. Kore is not merely protected by the earth, she is an extension of it. Her presence guarantees abundance. This is why her disappearance is catastrophic. Before that rupture, Kore's world is one of harmony. She exists within a divine order that appears stable. The fields are fertile, the seasons flow predictably. There is no suggestion that this balance is fragile. The myth does not foreshadow her descent with warnings. It arrives suddenly, violently interrupting an otherwise peaceful rhythm. This mirrors real experience. Famine, death, and loss often come without preparation. Kore's lack of narrative complexity before the abduction serves a purpose. It makes the loss sharper. When she vanishes, the world loses something uncomplicated and whole. Later interpretations sometimes attempt to read hidden strength or foresight into Kore's early state, but canon sources do not support this. She is not secretly plotting or anticipating transformation, she is simply living. That simplicity is essential. In the Homeric hymn to Demeter, Kore is gathering flowers with companions when the earth opens beneath her. This moment is not framed as punishment or consequence. It is framed as intrusion. The meadow is a safe space. The act of gathering flowers is communal, gentle, and unthreatening. The violence of the descent contrasts deliberately with this setting. The flowers themselves matter. The narcissus, often named in the hymn, is described as unusually beautiful, deliberately grown by Gaia to lure Kore. This detail implicates the earth itself in the event, complicating the idea of innocence and consent. The land both nurtures and betrays. Kore's role before the descent is to represent what is lost when growth is interrupted. She is not flawed, she does not provoke the event. Her disappearance is not moralized. This is crucial. The myth does not justify what happens to her, it explains its consequences. Korea's identity also reflects the ancient Greek understanding of time. Spring was not permanent. It was a phase that inevitably gave way to heat, harvest, decline, and rest. Korea's maidenhood exists within that same structure. It is precious because it cannot last. The myth refuses to preserve innocence indefinitely. Once Kore descends, she cannot return to being only Kore. Even when she rises back to the upper world, she carries the underworld with her. Her name changes because her nature changes. But before that, she exists fully within light. Her relationships reflect this openness. She moves among peers. She is not isolated or guarded. Her life is social, embedded in shared experience. This stands in contrast to her later role as Queen of the Underworld, which is solitary and formal. The shift from communal wandering to sovereign stillness marks the emotional cost of her transformation. Kore's early depiction also lacks eroticization. She is not defined by desire or marriage. Her body is not a site of conflict yet. She exists outside of sexual politics. This makes the transition more jarring. The Greeks understood that growth involved exposure to forces beyond one's control. Kore's story reflects this worldview without romanticizing it. In agricultural terms, spring growth is vulnerable. Frost can destroy it. Floods can wash it away. Drought can halt it. Kore, as spring personified, carries that vulnerability. Her disappearance marks the end of unprotected growth. The myth does not suggest Kore could have avoided her fate. It does not blame her curiosity or naivete. This distinguishes her story from later narratives that frame female suffering as the result of error. Instead, Kore's descent is presented as a structural necessity. Something must die for cycles to exist. This does not make the loss acceptable, it makes it meaningful. Kore's silence before the descent should not be mistaken for emptiness. It represents a world where things simply are, without reflection or division. Her transformation introduces complexity, memory, and duality. Once she becomes Persephone, she remembers both worlds. But Kore does not remember the underworld. She does not yet know it exists as her future. This innocence is not ignorance, it is wholeness. As the myth progresses, that wholeness fractures, not into ruin, but into layers. Kore's early identity gives us a baseline. A vision of life untouched by death, growth uninterrupted by decay. It shows what the seasons once felt like before winter became permanent. When Kore vanishes, spring does not simply end. It is taken, and the world must learn how to endure without it. To understand Persephone's descent, it is necessary to understand where she descends to and who rules there. The underworld was not imagined as a place of chaos or cruelty by default. It was a structured realm with laws, geography, and purpose. And at its center stood Hades, one of the most misunderstood figures in Greek mythology. Hades was not the god of death itself. That role belonged to Thanatos. Hades ruled the realm of the dead, not the act of dying. This distinction mattered deeply to the ancient Greeks. Death was a moment. The underworld was permanence. Hades, authority began where life ended. Unlike Zeus or Poseidon, Hades did not rule over something visible. The sky could be seen. The sea could be sailed. The underworld was hidden, sealed beneath the earth, accessible only through death or rare divine passage. This invisibility shaped how Hades was perceived. His name was spoken cautiously, often avoided entirely. Euphemisms were used instead, such as the unseen one or the wealthy one, referencing the mineral riches buried underground. Fear and respect blurred together. Hades was not chaotic, he was inexorable. Once a soul entered his realm, it did not leave freely. This was not punishment, it was order. The dead belonged to the underworld, as surely as seeds belong to the soil. The Greeks did not imagine the underworld as uniformly torturous. That idea developed much later. Instead, it was a landscape of differentiation. Most souls went to the Asphodel Meadows, a neutral afterlife marked by shadow and memory without reward or torment. Only a few were punished in Tartarus. Only a few were rewarded in Elysium. This structure reflected Greek moral realism. Most lives were ordinary. Most deaths led to quiet continuation rather than dramatic judgment. The geography of the underworld reinforced its seriousness. Rivers defined boundaries. The Styx marked the ultimate oath. The Acheron carried sorrow. The Lethe erased memory. The Phlegethon burned. These rivers were not decorative. They enforced transition. Crossing them changed a soul. Charon ferried the dead across the waters, but only if they were properly buried and paid. Burial rites mattered because they ensured passage. A body left unburied trapped the soul between worlds. Cerberus guarded the gates, preventing escape rather than entry. The underworld did not hunt the living. It contained the dead. Hades' rule was absolute within his realm but limited beyond it. He did not interfere with Olympus. He did not seek conquest. He governed what was already his. This makes Persephone's arrival extraordinary. Before her descent, the underworld lacked a queen. It was complete but unbalanced, structured but sterile. Hades ruled alone, not because he was incomplete, but because his realm did not yet participate in cycles of return. The underworld was final. Persephone changed that. In myth, Hades is rarely portrayed as impulsive. He does not seduce or deceive frequently. His actions are deliberate. When he takes Persephone, it is with Zeus's consent in most canonical accounts. This does not absolve the act, but it situates it within divine politics. Marriage among the gods did not follow mortal norms. Consent was negotiated between male authorities. Women were often excluded from the decision. This reality is reflected, not endorsed, by the myth. Hades' desire for Persephone is not framed as lust alone. It is framed as a need to legitimize his realm. A queen brings continuity, lineage, and balance. In ancient Greek thought, rulership without partnership was unstable. Persephone's descent brings fertility into the underworld. She introduces life into a realm defined by its absence. This does not soften death, but it contextualizes it. Hades does not change his nature because of Persephone. He remains stern, lawful, unyielding. But his realm gains rhythm. The Greeks did not imagine Hades as evil. He was feared because he was unavoidable. His justice was consistent, not cruel. This consistency made him trustworthy in a strange way. Oaths sworn by the Styx were binding even on the gods. The underworld enforced truth. Persephone's eventual role as queen places her beside Hades as co-ruler, not captive. This distinction emerges over time and is crucial to understanding her transformation. She does not overthrow him, she complements him. The underworld itself becomes seasonal. When Persephone is present, it participates in growth through her connection to Demeter. When she leaves, it returns to stillness. This cyclical presence disrupts the idea of death as static. For the ancient Greeks, this was revolutionary. Seeds buried in the earth disappear, but they are not gone. They return. Persephone follows the same path. Her descent mirrors burial. Her return mirrors sprouting. Hades' realm thus becomes a necessary stage in life's cycle rather than its negation. This reframing does not make death gentle, it makes it meaningful. Hades remains firm in enforcing the rules of his domain. The pomegranate binds Persephone because consumption in the underworld establishes belonging. Eating is not symbolic, it is contractual. Once Persephone eats, she cannot remain entirely separate. This rule is not invented for her. It applies to all who consume there. The law existed before she arrived. Hades does not bend the law. Zeus negotiates around it. This distinction matters. It shows that the compromise arises from balance, not mercy. The underworld does not release Persephone freely. It releases her conditionally. In this way, Hades is not defeated. He is integrated into a larger cycle. Greek myths often explore the cost of balance. Harmony is achieved through loss, not avoidance. Hades' realm embodies that truth. It is silent, enduring, and patient. It waits. When Persephone descends, it receives her. When she ascends, it lets her go, but never completely. This partial belonging defines her dual identity. As we move into the moment of abduction itself, it becomes clear that the underworld was never meant to remain separate from the living world forever. Persephone bridges the divide, and Hades' realm, once static, becomes part of the rhythm that governs all things. The moment Persephone is taken does not arrive with warning. There are no omens carved into the sky, no gradual darkening of the world. The rupture comes suddenly, violently interrupting a scene defined by softness and abundance. This contrast is deliberate. The ancient myth does not ease its audience into loss. It forces them to feel it as it occurs. Persephone is gathering flowers. This detail appears consistently across canonical versions, most notably in the Homeric hymn to Demeter. She is not alone, but she is unguarded. She moves among companions, her attention fixed on the earth's surface, blossoms, color, scent. Her posture is downward, toward growth, not outward toward danger. The meadow is fertile, alive, peaceful. Then the earth opens. The ground itself splits apart, not as an accident, but as an action. Hades emerges from below in his chariot, drawn by immortal horses. This is not a slow ascent. It is forceful, abrupt, and unmistakable. Persephone is seized. The myth does not linger on her physical struggle, but it does not deny it. She cries out. She calls to her father Zeus, and to the gods above. No one answers. This silence matters. Zeus hears her. In most canonical accounts, he has already agreed to the marriage. His silence is not ignorance. It is consent given elsewhere, not here. The meadow closes. The earth seals itself as if nothing has happened. Flowers remain. Light remains. Only Persephone is gone. This is one of the most unsettling aspects of the myth. The world above continues unchanged, at least at first. Loss is localized before it spreads. Persephone's disappearance is total. She does not fade. She does not descend slowly. She is removed. The speed of the event reflects how loss often enters human life. Sudden, irreversible, and incomprehensible. As Hades carries Persephone downward, the world changes for her immediately. Light recedes, sound dulls, the air thickens, the familiar becomes unreachable. The underworld is not described in detail at this moment. The myth prioritizes separation over scenery. Persephone's experience is defined by removal, not orientation. Above ground, Demeter does not witness the abduction. This absence is critical. Demeter's grief is not immediate because she does not know yet. Ignorance delays mourning. Persephone's cries echo through the earth, but they are absorbed. The boundary between realms holds. Only Hecate hears her clearly. Hecate, goddess of thresholds and transitions, becomes the first witness. She hears Persephone's voice, but she does not see what happens. This partial knowledge reflects her liminal role. She stands between worlds, aware but not fully informed. Helios, the sun, sees everything. His later testimony confirms the act, but he does not intervene. These details reinforce a recurring theme in Greek myth. Knowledge does not always equal action. The abduction is not portrayed as romantic or mutual. Persephone does not choose it. The earth does not open for her benefit. The myth does not soften this. However, it also does not frame the act as uniquely monstrous within its cultural context. Divine marriages often occur without female consent. This reflects historical realities rather than moral endorsement. What distinguishes this event is its consequence. When Persephone is taken, something essential is removed from the surface world. The loss is not only Demeter's, it is ecological. The flowers Persephone was gathering become symbolic remnants. They remain rooted where she stood, marking absence. Time passes before Demeter realizes what has occurred. When she does, her response is immediate and consuming. But before grief reshapes the world, the abduction establishes several irreversible truths. First, Persephone has crossed a boundary no living being crosses casually. Second, the underworld has claimed something of the upper world. Third, the earth itself has been complicit. This complicity complicates blame. Gaia produces the narcissus that lures Persephone. The ground opens. Nature participates. This suggests that cycles of growth and decay are not imposed externally, they are embedded. The abduction is not a cosmic accident. It is structural. That does not make it gentle. Persephone's voice is lost below ground. Her cries do not travel back up. Communication between worlds collapses. This silence foreshadows the emotional isolation of the underworld. For Persephone, the descent marks the end of her identity as Kore. She has not yet claimed the name Persephone, but the transformation has begun. She is no longer fully of the world above. The abduction also establishes the imbalance that drives the rest of the myth. A world cannot function when one realm takes without accounting for the others. Demeter's reaction will expose this imbalance. But in this moment, the myth remains focused on separation. Persephone is alone. Hades does not speak in most versions during the abduction. His silence contrasts with Persephone's cries. Authority does not explain itself. The chariot moves. Darkness closes in. The meadow is left behind. From this point forward, the myth shifts from innocence to consequence. Nothing can return to what it was. The abduction is not a single event. It is a rupture that reverberates. Its effects will be felt in fields, in hunger, in ritual, and in time itself. The seasons are born here, not in the compromise that follows, but in the violence of separation. Without this moment, Demeter would not grieve. Without grief, the earth would not wither. Without withering, return would not matter. The myth does not justify the abduction. It explains why the world breaks and why it must learn how to mend. When Demeter realizes that Persephone is gone, the world begins to change. The myth does not describe this realization as a single moment. It unfolds through absence. Persephone does not return at the expected hour. Her voice is missing from the fields. The rhythm Demeter knows by instinct falters. A mother senses loss before it is explained. Demeter searches. She does not begin with divine restraint or measured inquiry. She moves immediately into motion, driven by a grief that overrides protocol and hierarchy. For 9 days and 9 nights, she wanders the earth without rest, without food, without bathing. She carries torches lit from the fires of Mount Etna, their flames marking her passage through the dark. This detail matters. Fire becomes a symbol of refusal. Demeter will not accept stillness. She will not retreat into private mourning. Her grief is public. As she moves across the land, Demeter asks every being she encounters, gods, mortals, spirits, if they have seen her daughter. No one answers clearly. Some do not know. Some know and stay silent. The silence of the gods compounds the loss. Only Hecate approaches her, drawn by shared liminality. Hecate has heard Persephone's cries, but she does not know where she went. Her partial knowledge mirrors Demeter's state, awareness without resolution. Together they seek Helios. Helios, the sun, cannot hide what he sees. He reveals the truth. Persephone was taken by Hades with Zeus's consent. This revelation does not end Demeter's grief. It ignites it. Demeter's pain transforms into anger, not explosive, but absolute. She withdraws from Olympus. She disguises herself as an old woman and walks among mortals, severing her visible connection to the gods. This withdrawal is strategic. Demeter does not attack Zeus directly. She does not challenge Hades with force. She removes herself from the system that depends on her. The earth begins to fail. Seeds do not sprout. Shoots wither. Fields lie barren. The soil becomes unresponsive, as if it is holding its breath. This is not gradual, it is catastrophic. The myth emphasizes the scale of the collapse. Entire regions fall into famine. Humanity begins to starve. Offerings to the gods diminish because there is nothing left to give. This consequence matters. The gods rely on mortal worship. Without sacrifice, their power weakens. Demeter's grief threatens not only human survival, but divine stability. The earth mirrors her emotional state. This connection between grief and fertility is central to the myth. Demeter does not curse the land out of spite. She cannot bring herself to nurture life while her own child is absent. Her sorrow is not performative, it is incapacitating. The myth frames this not as a failure of duty, but as a natural consequence of loss. Love binds Demeter to Persephone so completely that separation halts creation. This is one of the most radical statements in Greek mythology, that maternal grief can overpower cosmic order. Demeter's time among mortals reinforces this theme. In Eleusis, she is welcomed into the household of King Celeus and Queen Metanira. She becomes a nurse to their son, Demophon. In her care, the child thrives. Demeter attempts to make him immortal by placing him in fire each night, burning away mortality. When Metanira interrupts, terrified, the ritual breaks. Demeter reveals herself. This episode is not a side story. It reinforces Demeter's role as a giver of life and a remover of it. She can elevate mortals, but she cannot undo interruption. She commands the people of Eleusis to build her a temple. There, she withdraws fully. The famine intensifies. Zeus cannot ignore the crisis. The balance of the world is unraveling. He sends messengers to Demeter, offering honors, gifts, appeasement. She refuses. Demeter's grief cannot be bribed. Only Persephone's return will restore the earth. This standoff reveals the limits of authority. Zeus may rule Olympus, but he cannot compel Demeter to nurture life against her will. The myth presents this impasse as inevitable. No negotiation can occur without addressing the loss itself. Demeter's grief reshapes time. The agricultural year halts. Growth pauses. The world enters a suspended state. This is the birth of winter, not as a meteorological phenomenon, but as an emotional one. Winter becomes the season of absence, mirroring Demeter's mourning. The earth rests because Demeter cannot move forward. This reframing transforms seasonal death into an act of remembrance. Fields lie fallow, not because they are exhausted, but because they are waiting. Demeter's grief is not resolved quickly. The myth insists on duration. Mourning takes time. Restoration cannot be rushed. Only when Zeus agrees to send Hermes to retrieve Persephone does the stalemate begin to break. But even then, the outcome will not erase what has happened. Demeter will not get her daughter back fully. The world will not return to endless spring. Instead, a compromise will be forged, one that honors grief without allowing it to destroy everything. Demeter's sorrow teaches the gods a lesson the mortals already know. Life cannot continue unchanged after loss. It must adapt. As the earth waits, silent and bare, the stage is set for negotiation and for the rule that will bind Persephone to both worlds. The seasons are no longer theoretical. They are inevitable. The famine cannot continue indefinitely. Mortals are dying, fields lie barren, and the gods grow uneasy as sacrifices dwindle. Zeus, who allowed the abduction to occur, now faces the consequences of imbalance. Authority alone cannot sustain the cosmos when its foundations refuse to cooperate. Zeus sends Hermes. Hermes is the only god suited for this task. As messenger and guide, he moves freely between realms. He crosses boundaries without belonging to any single one. Where Demeter refuses Olympus and Hades rules below, Hermes navigates between. His descent into the underworld is not a challenge. It is a request carried with divine authority. Hades receives him. In canonical accounts, there is no violent confrontation, no battle, no trickery. The underworld operates on law, not impulse. Hermes delivers Zeus's command. Persephone must be returned so that life above can resume. Hades does not refuse. This detail matters. Hades is often imagined as stubborn or cruel, but the myth presents him as lawful. He understands the necessity of balance. He agrees to release Persephone. But the rules of the underworld cannot be undone. Before Persephone departs, she eats. The pomegranate seeds are small, bright, and irrevocable. In some versions she eats 6 seeds, in others 4. The exact number varies, but the consequence does not. Consumption binds. To eat the food of the underworld is to accept belonging. This rule is ancient and impersonal. It applies to gods and mortals alike. The myth does not clearly state whether Persephone eats willingly or under persuasion. Canon sources do not provide definitive intent. What matters is the result. Once eaten, Persephone cannot fully return. This moment transforms her role permanently. She is no longer only a daughter taken and returned. She becomes a queen with obligations. Hermes escorts Persephone upward. As she ascends, the worlds begin to shift. Demeter senses her return before seeing her. The earth stirs. Seeds remember how to grow. When mother and daughter reunite, the joy is immediate and overwhelming. Demeter's grief breaks, but it does not vanish. Persephone tells her what has happened. The pomegranate seeds matter. Demeter's response is not rage, but recognition. She understands the law. Zeus intervenes. A compromise is forged. Persephone will spend part of the year above ground with Demeter and part below with Hades. The division varies by tradition, but the structure remains consistent. This agreement restores balance. Demeter allows the earth to bloom again. Crops rise. Hunger recedes. Sacrifice resumes. But the world is changed. Spring and summer mark Persephone's presence above. Autumn and winter reflect her descent. The seasons are not punishment. They are structure. The pomegranate becomes a symbol not of temptation, but of contract. It represents the cost of transition. Once something is tasted, it cannot be untasted. Persephone accepts her dual role. She does not reject the underworld, nor does she abandon the living world. She belongs to both. This duality defines her power. The myth does not present the compromise as perfect. Demeter still mourns each year. Persephone still descends. But life continues. The earth learns rhythm. As Persephone moves between realms, she carries memory. The underworld is no longer entirely cut off from growth. The living world is no longer ignorant of death. This is not resolution. It is endurance. The seasons are born not from harmony, but from negotiation. And the pomegranate marks the point where innocence gives way to obligation. With the compromise in place, the world begins to move again, not forward in a straight line, but in a circle. The agreement that binds Persephone to both realms does more than reunite mother and daughter part of the year. It establishes time as the ancient Greeks experienced it, cyclical, emotional, and rooted in the land. The seasons are not invented all at once. They emerge as a pattern of response. Persephone's presence above the earth restores Demeter's capacity to nurture. Her absence withdraws it. The land learns to follow this rhythm because it has no other choice. Spring arrives when Persephone returns. This is not metaphorical. In the mythic worldview, her ascent literally brings growth back with her. The soil loosens. Seeds germinate. Shoots push upward. The earth exhales. Demeter does not simply allow growth again. She rejoices in it. Her joy is active, fertile, generous. She teaches mortals when to plant and how to prepare the fields. Festivals mark this renewal. The return of Persephone is celebrated not as a private reunion, but as a communal survival. Summer follows naturally. With Persephone present, Demeter's power is stable. Crops mature. Fields fill out. Grain hardens. The work of spring is rewarded with visible abundance. Summer is not frantic growth, but sustained life. Autumn marks transition. As Persephone's time above draws to a close, the world prepares. Harvest festivals honor Demeter's gift while acknowledging its limit. Grain is cut and stored. Fruits are gathered. The land does not mourn yet, but it anticipates. Winter arrives when Persephone descends. Demeter does not destroy the earth. She withdraws from it. Growth slows. Fields lie fallow. Life turns inward. The land rests because Demeter grieves. This resting is not failure. It is necessary. In agricultural terms, fields left fallow regain fertility. In emotional terms, grief requires stillness. The myth unites these truths. Winter becomes sacred pause. The Greek agricultural calendar aligned closely with this understanding. Planting and harvesting were timed around predictable seasonal shifts, but those shifts were understood as expressions of divine emotion rather than mechanical cycles. This perspective gave hardship meaning. When crops failed or winters lingered, people did not assume the world was broken beyond repair. They believed the cycle had been disrupted, perhaps by neglect of ritual, perhaps by imbalance among the gods. The myth of Persephone provided a framework for endurance. Importantly, the seasons are not equal in emotional tone. Spring is joy, summer is fulfillment. Autumn is preparation, winter is mourning. This emotional mapping reflects human experience. The myth does not flatten time into neutral segments. It gives each season character. Persephone's movement governs this character. She is not a passive marker. She is the cause. Her return does not erase winter. It follows it. The Greeks did not imagine an eternal spring as ideal. Such a world would lack depth. Without winter, growth would lose meaning. The compromise preserves contrast. This structure also reshapes Persephone's identity. She becomes the axis of time itself. Her body moves through space, and time responds. She is no longer only a daughter or a queen. She is the hinge between life and death. This role elevates her beyond victimhood. The myth does not deny the violence of her abduction, but it does not freeze her there. Persephone gains authority through endurance and adaptation. Her descent becomes purposeful, not merely imposed. Each year she returns below knowing she will rise again. This knowledge changes the meaning of absence. For Demeter, winter becomes bearable because it is bounded. Grief has an end. For mortals, hardship becomes survivable because it is temporary. The myth teaches patience. It also teaches respect for limits. Growth cannot be constant. Rest is part of fertility. The birth of the seasons transforms time from a threat into a pattern. This pattern becomes ritualized. Festivals mark Persephone's return and departure. Offerings are timed to her movement. Human life aligns itself with her path. In this way, the myth integrates cosmic events with daily labor. The seasons are not distant forces. They are reminders of relationship. Relationship between mother and daughter. Relationship between gods and mortals. Relationship between life and death. Persephone's cycle ensures that none of these relationships become absolute. Life contains death. Death contains memory. Memory allows return. The world does not heal by forgetting. It heals by remembering and moving anyway. As Persephone descends and ascends, the earth learns to do the same. The seasons are not punishment. They are survival made visible. By the time the myth of Persephone had taken its familiar shape, it was no longer only a story told to explain the seasons. It had become a foundation for ritual, identity, and hope. The movement of Persephone between worlds was reenacted, honored, and contemplated through cult practice, most famously in the Eleusinian Mysteries. These rites did not merely retell the myth. They allowed participants to step into it. To understand the significance of Persephone's worship, it is necessary to understand how Greek religion functioned. There was no centralized doctrine. No sacred book dictated belief. Instead, religion unfolded through ritual action. What mattered was not what one believed privately, but what one did publicly. Demeter and Persephone occupied a unique position in this system. Their myth addressed universal experiences, loss, death, renewal, rather than local politics or heroic lineage. This universality allowed their worship to cross social boundaries. The Eleusinian Mysteries, held annually near the city of Eleusis, were among the most important religious rites in the Greek world. They endured for centuries, attracting initiates from across the Mediterranean. Even Roman emperors sought initiation. What happened during the Mysteries was guarded carefully. Initiates swore oaths of secrecy, and ancient sources respect this silence. What can be said with certainty is that the rites centered on Demeter's grief, Persephone's descent, and the promise of return. Participants were not promised immortality. They were promised a different relationship with death. Ancient authors described the Mysteries as transformative. Those who participated were said to face death with less fear. This suggests that Persephone's dual existence offered reassurance, not that death could be avoided, but that it was part of a larger cycle. Persephone's role within the Mysteries was complex. She was not simply a victim whose suffering elicited pity. She was a guide, a ruler of the dead who understood both worlds. This elevated her status beyond that of Kore. In cult practice, Persephone was often invoked alongside Demeter, but her identity was distinct. Demeter governed growth and nourishment. Persephone governed transition. Together, they formed a complete vision of life. Persephone's title as Queen of the Underworld became increasingly emphasized over time. As ruler beside Hades, she gained authority over the fate of souls. This authority did not negate her origins, it expanded them. The underworld itself began to feel less absolute. Persephone's presence softened its finality without removing its seriousness. Roman adaptations of the myth, particularly the story of Proserpina, preserved the core structure while altering emphasis. Roman writers often highlighted the legal aspects of the marriage and the seasonal cycle's alignment with agricultural policy. The emotional core remained intact. In both Greek and Roman contexts, Persephone became a figure associated with rebirth, vegetation, and the mystery of continuity. Her worship extended beyond Eleusis. Local cults honored her as a chthonic goddess, offering libations poured into the earth rather than raised to the sky. These practices reinforced her connection to what lies beneath. Persephone was invoked during burial rites, planting seasons, and moments of transition. She was not approached casually. Her dual nature demanded respect. As philosophical schools emerged, thinkers interpreted the myth differently. Some saw Persephone as an allegory of the soul's descent into the body and eventual return. Others emphasized agricultural symbolism. What remained consistent was the recognition of balance. The myth did not resolve suffering. It contextualized it. This endurance of meaning explains why Persephone's story survived long after belief in the Olympian gods faded. The myth speaks to cycles that remain visible: seasons, grief, recovery. In worship and interpretation alike, Persephone evolved from maiden to mediator. She became the reminder that life does not end at the point of loss. It transforms. As the ancient world changed, Persephone's story adapted without losing its core truth. That truth waits quietly at the edge of every winter. Something has gone below, and something will return. The story of Persephone does not end with her ascent or descent. It continues in the space between them, in the rhythm that governs fields, grief, memory, and time itself. Long after temples crumbled and rituals fell silent, the pattern she embodies remained visible in the world. Each year, the earth still withdraws. Each year, it returns. The ancient Greeks understood Persephone not as a solution to suffering, but as a framework for living with it. Her myth does not promise escape from loss. It promises continuity through it. Persephone becomes what the world requires her to be. She begins as core, untouched and whole. She becomes queen of the underworld, bearing the weight of death. She returns as something new, not restored innocence, but expanded identity. This transformation is irreversible. That is the point. Greek myth rarely celebrates preservation. It honors endurance. Persephone does not remain forever in spring because spring alone cannot sustain life. Without winter, growth would exhaust itself. The myth insists that rest, absence, and stillness are not failures. They are necessary phases. Persephone's movement teaches that meaning is not found in permanence but in return. Demeter's grief, too, becomes instructive. She does not overcome loss by forgetting it. She integrates it into the cycle of the world. Each winter is an act of remembrance. Each spring is an act of courage. Together, mother and daughter redefine power. Power is not domination. Power is not denial. Power is the ability to continue. This is why the myth endured. It speaks to agricultural societies and modern ones alike. Fields still lie fallow. People still grieve. Time still moves forward, whether one is ready or not. Persephone stands at the center of this truth. She is not a symbol to be solved. She is a presence to be recognized. Her story acknowledges that life will take what we are not prepared to give. It also insists that something remains. The seasons do not erase each other. Winter does not undo summer. Summer does not cancel winter. They coexist because Persephone belongs to both worlds. In this way, the myth refuses simple resolution. It offers rhythm instead. Rhythm allows anticipation. Rhythm allows endurance. The earth waits because it knows return is possible. And so do we. As this story comes to rest, take a moment to consider the ground beneath you, how many winters it has survived, how many returns it has witnessed. If you found something meaningful in this journey, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories continue to find their way into the quiet hours where they belong. Until next time, rest well.